Hey, it's me again, Martin Webb, Balance Beam. And it's time to talk about the climate. You and me and us again and everything, because we're blessed. We're blessed. Somehow we were selected. Yeah. And it's this unique combination of these amazing gifts, technology, information, a confluence of so much happening all at once. Millennia of injustices, of inequality happening between genders and races and continents and species. It's pretty amazing. So what we've been talking about, though, is continuing to provide a non-commercial, direct between people space to talk about and invigorate personal action and awareness. Awareness is so key. And this is called the balance beam because we're shining a beam, putting a focus, shining a light on how to be more in balance. That's my encouragement. If you're really wanting to know one basic thing, tell me what I can do. What's climate action? A lot of the climate action is adjusting our mindset and our thoughts and our expectations. And one of the biggest things is to really have as your North Star, your center, as you make personal action choices, it's to focus on being more in balance. It's not necessarily to stop something or to fight against something and bringing that old school combative masculine energy and the testosterone. Instead, it's about bringing collaboration and making sure that you're staying in balance and focusing on being in balance as an individual. We've talked in past balance beams about how emotionally balanced you treat the environment better. For most people in this developed world and society, the more emotional we get and the more out of balance we get, the more we tend to make rash decisions. We tend to overconsume. We tend to buy things we don't need. We tend to shop more. We tend to drive worse. We tend to run late and be angry when we drive, driving faster than we need, and braking and jackrabbit starting and stopping. All these things are harder on the environment. So being in balance is just a good way to think about what should I be doing. You should be focusing on how can we be more in balance, because that's the gifts that nature is giving us and telling us. When you look at the seasons, the hot and cold, the day and the night, sun and the moon, all of these things, even these beautiful planets that we're on here, they're in perfect balance. I mean, if they were just a smidgen closer to the sun or a smidgen farther away from the sun, we wouldn't be talking. We'd drop in or we'd drop out. But somehow we've hit this perfect sweet spot. And what's interesting too is when you consider the different objects in our known galaxy to our human senses, the ones that have hit that balance point tend to be circular. And the ones that are out of balance, like the asteroids that you see just hurtling around, they tend to be these weird things all out of shape and stuff like that. So a lot of messages when it comes to biomimicry, as they say, and nature has a lot of the answers. And again, as I like to say here on the balance beam, when it comes to nature and the planet, a lot of us over the last century have been kind of trained through marketing to think that as humans we somehow built this planet, we somehow run it and operate it, we own it. And we didn't build it, we don't own it or operate it, it operates us. It was here before us, and it has an operating system called nature, and we're part of that. And it's got a very beautiful specific code, and it requires a very fine balance between things, between life and decay and that type of thing. So that's kind of where the name the balance beam comes from. And what we've been talking about lately is how just important personal action is. Personal action is number one right now in regaining as much balance as we can, because part of why I did this is there's just too much unfounded faith in politics and government and someone else to take care of the problem. Someone else is going to play our part or your part. And politics and government aren't taking care of anything. They're both built to sustain the status quo. And that's kind of cool. That means the good news is it puts the control in our hands. And so what I want to continue to talk about is how a couple of different things. I'm going to read a couple articles towards the end, so there's going to be part 2 as usual. This is Balance Beam 145, and on some of the platforms you see this, on both a Facebook page and an Instagram page, this shows up in 2 15-minute parts. And so please make sure that you stay tuned and watch Balance Beam 145 part 2, where I'm going to read a little bit about Greta Thunberg, and also the latest research on what future generations can expect versus current generations. So, but the challenge, sometimes we like to talk about with the Balance Beam a specific challenge and then an action to take. And the challenge this time is the politics and government, they don't, and individuals even, small businesses and individuals, and politics and government don't seem to believe there's an emergency. What I'm noticing is us as individuals and the society we tend to take are signals from individuals around us and the small businesses around us. That's what we're influenced by in our purchasing habits. And then what are politics and government doing? You know, what winds are they blowing? And when you think about the climate, there's really not the treatment of this as an emergency. You're not feeling it from a lot of people. In the media even, in politics, government, and in small business. And I say that specifically because small business is typically run by individuals like me and you. And so if individuals aren't really talking about it and freaking out about it yet, or taking action, or discussing, or raising awareness, then the small businesses won't either. But there are people who are taking this very seriously. Billions of people, as well as large businesses, corporations, financing outfits, they're taking this very seriously. So just remind yourself that we take a lot of our signals from peers, politics, and media. And right now, those three are not giving us the signals we need to: peers, politics, and media. But just because politicians, government, small businesses, and people aren't taking this seriously, doesn't mean that you shouldn't either. Doesn't mean that you should too. Just because you're not getting those signals, doesn't mean you kick back. You're not going to get a letter in the mail telling you it's time to go. Because there are, again, big businesses and billions of people are taking this very seriously. And so another thing that I want to mention is, and so what I want to tell you about is, you know, that there is an emergency, and learn how to play your part and be an example, because peer influence, we've talked about this before. There's some cool research that talks about what influences people's behavior, specifically in regards to energy choices, the environment, climate. And sometimes it's convenience, sometimes it's cost. You know, if something's more convenient than something else, that'll likely influence your decision, right? If it's more convenient to just keep paying a utility bill, then call 3 different companies, get bids, listen to things, get financing, set up a solar installation, all that stuff. You're more likely to go with the convenience. So there's convenience, then there's cost. If something's more expensive versus cheaper, less likely to do it. But the research gave us a clue. Y'all looking for a clue on more climate action? This is how to kind of double your efforts, okay? It's sort of like on KVMR when I do my radio show, they have pledge drives throughout the year, 2 or 3 times a year, and they have anonymous matching donors, where it's like, look, I've got an anonymous person that says if people pledge $1,000 on my show for the next 2 hours, they'll match it with another $1,000. So every dollar you submit, it's going to be matched by this other person. But if you don't, we don't get any of that. And so it's kind of the same with personal peer influence. It turns out that overrides both cost and convenience. It wins. They have to take bronze and silver. Peer influence has a much stronger direct effect on people's individual personal choices in regards to the energy, the environment, and the climate. Peer influence. So if they know in here that someone like Sean Burr is going solar, who's, I think, watching right now, they're more likely to do it. And so it's that peer influence. So even though it might be less convenient and it might seem like it's costly, if your friend says, oh man, this is what you should do and here's why I did it and it was great and you should call these people, then all of a sudden you're going to do it. So when it comes to taking action and helping solve this issue, Peer influence is number one. And part of the reason I mention that is I had a really lovely conversation last night with a dear, dear friend. We talked about all sorts of things. We talked about the environment because I've got people, hey, there's Jason. I've got people that I am open to talk to me about how she visited all this different family and how she encountered different young generations, teenagers, young adults, and, oh, lost signal, are you guys seeing me okay? Because that happened with a friend on the East Coast. I just see here in the chat that Sarah says lost signal. But it looks like I still have somebody's able to watch. So, oh, I just lost another person. So, I hope that you guys are all able to get back on. Hopefully I don't have really crappy internet. The good news is this will be archived and you can watch it again. So bottom line here, though, is this. Oh, thanks, Sean. Sean says I'm back. So what I want to tell you, though, is that if you're like my friend, she witnessed really good, smart, progressive, well-meaning, and sometimes just moderate, not even progressive, just good people, family people, and even young adults. You know, you hear a lot about younger generations really concerned about the climate and everything. Well, she said, you know, it's really stressful for me because I'm really aware, and I visited people, and they would leave lights on, and they would leave stuff running unnecessarily, and I would want to turn things off, and they would leave water running, and they would eat horribly, and she just was beside herself, but she didn't know what to say, and so didn't necessarily say anything. And it's sort of like, what do you do when you're aware and you know that people around you see inaction or a lack of awareness or what could be considered poor climate behavior or even poor climate habits. Behavior would be like a one-time thing, but then you can see like poor climate habits where it's like, oh man, they shouldn't do that. So it's interesting to try and figure out, you know, what's comfortable with how to demonstrate your feelings. And sometimes it's best just to go like, oh my gosh, is it okay if I turn a couple of these lights off? Because that's what I'd like to keep things efficient at home or whatever. You know, it's really challenging to figure out what to say. And I want to encourage people to figure out how to make it fun and exciting and enjoyable to raise awareness. If you're struggling, then damn it, just share these. All of these balance beams, every time I do one, just share it. Put it out onto your social media. Because I promise you, once people get pointed in the right direction, they will know what to do. Just like you did. We didn't all start with this level of awareness, did we? No. But trust in the goodness of people. They need to hear the right things the right way, and the rest will be unlocked. We don't need to suddenly dump all over somebody like they're, you know, an addict and you're doing an intervention. Although this is very much like that. As a former addict, this is very much like an entire globe of people being addicted, because one of the truest, most basic definitions of addiction is this: being unable to stop doing something in the face of negative consequences. In the face of negative consequences. Which is different than being unable to stop doing something in the face of positive consequences. Like, you could say a young infant is addicted to mother's milk, but it's getting positive reinforcement, or someone could be addicted to an antidepressant pill, but if it actually brings them a net positive, it's less of an addiction and it's more of a dependence on something. So you might take something constantly with a positive benefit. Addiction, at its most basic, is unable to stop even in the face of these negative consequences. And look at us. I drove a hybrid here. It still pumps out gas. So a lot of this is kind of about addiction, and it's also about slowly weaning ourselves off. For me, I went through a couple of years of a methadone clinic, which was about actually tapering oneself off of an addiction, a lifestyle, an addictive substance, and I very much think that this is similar. So I feel like addicts, people who have overcome terminal illnesses, veterans of wars, they all are going to play an important part on how we overcome life-threatening challenges like we're seeing right now. That was my jingles. Let me do my editing dance, and I'm going to tell you about Greta Thunberg. Ready? Edit here, edit here. That's right. Part 2. You just tuned in, part 2. Balance Beam 145. My name is Martin Webb, and we're here talking today again about the importance of personal action, especially in light of the political failure that's upcoming here with these talks in Glasgow. Everyone basically that's a big player, the UK, the UN, the US, have all acknowledged they've collected all the pledges and the rhetoric people are going to talk about, and it still burns up the planet and gets us close to 3 degrees warming. So the dorky old politicians, the leaders, I don't know where the hell they think they're leading us. They're leading us off a cliff. They can't even talk the talk. You know, it's one thing to talk the talk. Like, here's our plan to keep it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Or, all right, we're going to let it go past 1.5 and we're going to go to 2, which we said we might do in the Paris Agreement, which actually makes a bunch of countries disappear off the planet. All the Pacific Island nations, gone. Can you imagine that? If, like, your country was in the balance between 1.5 and 2 degrees, and you're just watching the rest of the world biting your nails, and we're like, I don't know. We could make a lot of money if we let it go to 2, couldn't we? We could. And the 1.5 Pacific Islanders were like, please don't make us go away. So anyway, what I want to tell you about is Greta Thunberg, and how, you know, I'm really in line with her. She's cheeky, and she's doesn't have a filter that's, you know, trying to be nice and spinning. That's why I also want to tell people here is over the next month or so, you're going to get a lot of spin from the media and politics and governments that make you think they're doing things, and you know what the agreement is, and oh yeah, we're close, and it's leaving a window for this, and no, they're basically agreeing that they can't do it. Seriously, they have no plan. If they had a plan, they'd be acting on it. They all had an agreement 5-6 years ago that they couldn't do it. So this is their big chance. This was it. Are you serious? Are you serious? Are you looking around at the climate? We have one planet. There's 200 countries. All the leaders got together, and they're like, yeah, no, don't count on us. We're not leading you guys anywhere. So here's what Greta Thunberg thinks of this. Greta Thunberg has excoriated global leaders over their promises to address the climate emergency, dismissing them as blah, blah, blah. And it's true. It's just rhetorical nonsense. They've never acted on any of it. And that's the sad thing, is the pledges they've submitted are horrible. They go beyond the Paris Agreement, and they haven't done anything to meet their horrible things. So right now we're just business as usual, off to the races. Greta quoted statements by Boris Johnson. This is not some expensive, politically correct green act of bunny hugging. She quoted Narendra Modi of India. Fighting climate change calls for innovation, cooperation, and willpower, but she said the science did not lie. Carbon emissions need to be cut in half by the end of this decade. Okay, this is the decade. This is it. This is the decade. That means we all need to have a plan. Get that? Yeah. You can't be sitting back being like, Mama Teat, give me half less over the next decade. Like, no, get that shit out of your system, okay? Start to figure out how to methadone clinic your fossil fuel ass off of this stuff and begin switching to as little as possible, as local as possible, as green as possible. Have a personal plan to do what these bozos can't. Science has given us instructions. It's like, all right, let's do this. We can do this. We can. So instead of being cut in half over the next decade, this is where we are headed after collecting all of the new pledges that are supposed to help save everything. Carbon emissions instead, are they on track to go down 50% like they need to? Are they on track to go down at all? Give us some hope. No, they're on track to go up. By the end of the decade, the UN says they're going to go up by 16%, and that's not necessarily going to cut what needs to happen. Here's what Greta says. She says, build back better, blah, 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 green economy, blah, 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 net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah. She said all this in a speech to the Youth for Climate Summit in Milan, Italy, last week. She says, this is all we hear from our so-called leaders. We're on the same page. High fives, Greta. Words that sound great, but so far have not led to action. Our hopes and ambitions drown in their empty promises. Well, the COP26, and I just want to remind people again what that stands for, because you're going to see it and hear about it. COP stands for Conference of Parties or Conference of Participants. There's been 26 of these bad boys going back since the late 80s, I believe, or early 90s, and it led to the Paris Climate Agreement. And this is the 26th one, and it's supposed to re-up everybody's pledges from the Paris Climate Agreement. So this starts in 1 month on Halloween in Glasgow on October 31st, and all the big polluting countries, that's us, thank you very much. All the big polluting countries must deliver tougher pledges to cut emissions to keep the goal of 1.5 degrees within reach. Said Thunberg, whose solo climate strike in 2016 sparked a movement worldwide of millions of young climate protesters, she said, of course we need constructive dialogue. But they've now had 30 years of blah, blah, blah. And where has that led us? We can still turn this around. It is entirely impossible. It will take immediate, drastic annual emissions reductions, but not if things go on like today. Our leaders' intentional lack of action is a betrayal toward all present and future generations. Tell us what you really think, Greta. Research published on Monday, and I'm going to read you this next if I have time here. Research published on Monday showed that children born today, bless their souls, would experience many times more extreme heat waves and other climate disasters over their lifetimes than their grandparents. Even if countries fulfill their current emissions pledges, which no one has ever done in the history of life on the planet. One country, Gambia. Okay, I want to give them credit. Props to Gambia, African country. They're the only country in the world that's like, yeah, we're doing what we said we would. We're trying to get to 1.5. I thought that's what we were trying to effing do, you guys. And everyone else was like, no, God, no. We were trying to just delay, make people think we were doing stuff, stay in power, keep getting elected, and kick this can down the road. So anyway, it says here, officials, this is the big news too. This was another thing we read recently. Officials from the UN, the UK, and the US. That's a lot of U's, okay? I'm gonna say them again. UN, UK, US. Said that the COP26 would not produce the breakthrough needed we've all been waiting for to fulfill the actual Paris Agreement. But that the broader goal of keeping 1.5 C alive was still possible. That's the big refrain that you're gonna hear. It's still alive. We're keeping that hope of 1.5 still alive. No, they're not, dingbats. It says Thunberg, as well as Vanessa Nakate from Uganda and hundreds of other people from across the world are attending the Youth for Climate Summit. It's hosted by the Italian government, who is the UK's partner in running the COP26. So Italy and UK. UK is getting the adult version. Italy got the youth version. The Youth Summit consists of working groups of young people debating how to increase their participation in decision-making, their role in helping to transform energy use, nature conservation, and climate adaptation, and how education can create a climate-conscious society. It builds on a youth climate summit held at the UN headquarters in New York in 2019. Thunberg said, almost done with the Thunberg thing. Greta said, they invite cherry-picked young people to meetings like this to pretend that they listen to us, but they clearly don't listen to us. Our emissions are still rising. The science doesn't lie. We can no longer let the people in power decide what is politically possible. We can no longer let the people in power decide what hope is. They don't get to decide how much we hope. If they fail, we don't go, oh, crap. Our hope's not based on those numbskulls. It says hope is not passive. Hope is not blah, blah, blah. Hope is telling the truth. Hope is taking action. And hope always comes from the people. Greta. It says, last thing here, it says, large numbers of youth climate protesters took to the streets on Friday in almost 100 countries around the world, including 100,000 young climate protesters in Berlin, where Thunberg spoke. Did you hear damn thing in the US? No. Was that intentional? Yes. Okay, and then here's this last little bit of research. And then I'm going to remind you guys about the walking thing. That's the challenge this week. Okay, new info. And this is intended to spark you to take this really seriously and to play your part. And not only play your part, but set a good shining example. Do it from your heart. Do it from a way that makes you remind yourself that, man, I'm helping bring things back into balance. I'm fulfilling my purpose as a really unique being on this planet. Yeah, do it in a way that's figuring out, like, it's not the same message for everybody. What company are you around? Who are you talking to? It's going to require different languages, different ways of speaking and feeling. But the important thing is to come from a place of hope and balance. You know, it's good to keep expectations low. We know how bad things can get, right? Everything can die here pretty quickly, okay? Yeah, but we don't know how good things can get. We don't know. We just don't know. And we need to try our hardest to still have an upper limit, knowing that reality is going to be somewhere in between. But hope for the best and live that way. Okay, so it says, people born today will suffer many times more extreme heat waves and other climate disasters over their lifetimes than their grandparents' research has shown. This study is the first to assess the contrasting experience of climate extremes by different age groups. We're all going to experience it differently, obviously, depending on who you are and where you live, economically. Race is going to dictate some of that. Geography is going to dictate some of that. This is the first time that they were like, what about if we looked at it by age? What's the difference going to be? It says the study is the first to assess the contrasting experience of climate extremes by different age groups and starkly highlights the intergenerational injustice posed by the climate crisis. Because that's one of the things about this climate crisis, filled with injustice. The people that are least responsible for it are paying the most. And that's the young and the born and the unborn, least responsible for it, they're going to pay the most. And the poor and underdeveloped and the island nations, least responsible, paying the most. The analysis showed that a child born in 2020 will endure an average of 30 extreme heat waves in their lifetime, even if countries fulfill their current pledges to cut carbon emissions, which is a joke, they never have. 30 extreme heat waves in their lifetime. Let's just say they live 60 years. So every other year, extreme heat wave. That is 7 times more heat waves than someone born in 1960. 7 times more heat waves. So as opposed to 4 extreme heat waves a year for people born in 60, child born today, 30 extreme heat waves. So if you were born in 1960 and you think you've got it bad, imagine 7 times as many. Today's babies will also grow up to experience twice as many droughts and wildfires. Twice as many, as if that was possible. 3 times more river floods and crop failures than someone who is 60 years old today. However, okay, here's the instructions, everyone. Cotton out of the ears and in the mouth. Rapidly cutting global emissions to keep heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius would almost halve the heat waves today's children will experience. Cut it in half. And if we can't get it down to 1.5, but we get it to 2, which is the upper limit of the fake Paris Agreement, that would reduce it by a quarter. It's another reason why we need to be doing this for them. A vital task of this upcoming summit is to bloody blang blang ziggity bang zoop zoops. It said people under 40 today were set to live unprecedented lives, suffering heat waves, droughts, floods, and crop failures that would have been virtually impossible, 0.01% chance without global heating. Said an editor of Carbon Brief said these new findings reinforce our analysis, which showed that today's children will need to emit 8 times less CO2 over their lifetime than their grandparents in order to keep things to 1.5. The research was published in the journal Science. It used sophisticated models. They said the likely going to be an underestimate. And that highlights a disproportionate climate change burden for younger people in the global south. The analysis found that only those aged under 40 years old today will live to see the consequences of the choices made today on emissions cuts. Those who are older will have died before the impacts of those choices become apparent in the world. So take a walk, remember? Take a walk. Half hour in the morning, half hour in the evening, at least a half hour a day. Pump it up from there. It's the lowest carbon way of you being in the world. You use nature's volume, lighting, temperature controls. You're in a balanced environment. You're breathing, you're walking. It's going to feel good. I'll see you next week.